Have you ever noticed that even in the moments that should be most intense in your life, you feel as if you're watching everything through a screen, as if there were an invisible barrier between you and your own emotions? Maybe you've noticed this during a hug that should have been comforting but felt mechanical, or during an important personal achievement when you expected to feel intense joy but experienced only a vague and fleeting satisfaction. This feeling of being emotionally anesthetized isn't your fault. It's not a sign that you've become a cold or insensitive person. In fact, you may be experiencing one of the most subtle and dangerous transformations of our era, the gradual erosion of our capacity to feel deeply. Imagine an 18th century person receiving a letter from a loved one who had departed on a long journey. The arrival of that letter was an intense emotional event. They would hold it in their hands, feel the texture of the paper, recognize the unique handwriting, and each word was read with total attention, generating waves of emotion that could last for days. Now compare that to you checking your messages while walking, eating, or watching television. How many of these interactions generate an emotion in you that lingers, that echoes in your mind and heart hours later? The difference isn't just in the technology, but in how our capacity to process and feel emotions has been fundamentally altered by the world we've built. For millions of years of evolution, the human emotional system developed to deal with limited and meaningful stimuli. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived in small groups where every social interaction carried weight. Each danger represented a real and immediate threat. Each joy was connected to fundamental survival needs. The human brain didn't evolve to process the constant bombardment of artificial emotional stimuli that characterizes our era. When you wake up and immediately check your phone, your nervous system is subjected to a sequence of emotional microshocks. An alarming news story about a crisis on the other side of the world, a photo of a friend on vacation that awakens envy, a work message that generates anxiety, a funny video that provokes automatic laughter. All of this before you even brush your teeth. Your brain, in a matter of minutes, processes more emotional variations than our ancestors experienced in entire weeks. The result isn't a more emotionally rich life, but the opposite. It's as if you were constantly eating candy. At first, each piece is intense and pleasurable, but gradually your palate becomes dulled and you need larger amounts of sugar to feel anything. The Industrial Revolution altered our relationship with time and space, but the digital revolution is altering our relationship with our own emotions. Consider how you consume entertainment today. Series are created to release dopamine at calculated intervals. Games are programmed to activate reward systems in patterns that keep you engaged, not necessarily happy. Social networks are structured to provoke quick and superficial emotional responses that keep you scrolling. Each of these experiences is calibrated to capture your emotional attention without necessarily nurturing your capacity to feel deeply and sustainedly. It's as if we're being trained to consume emotions the same way we consume fast food. Quick, intense in the first moment, but leaving a feeling of emptiness soon after. And just as fast food can addict our palate and make us lose appreciation for more subtle and complex flavors, fast feeling may be addicting our emotional system and making us lose the capacity to appreciate the deeper and more lasting feelings that give meaning to human life. Observe your own emotional reactions throughout a typical day. How many of them are genuine responses to your direct experience, and how many are conditioned responses to digital stimuli designed to capture your attention? When you see a photo of food on Instagram, is the hunger you feel real, or is it a programmed response? When you watch a movie and cry, are you processing something personal and meaningful, or are you simply being manipulated by narrative techniques refined over decades to provoke that specific response? I'm not suggesting that all these experiences are false or without value, but that we're losing the capacity to distinguish between genuine emotions and conditioned reactions. And more importantly, we're losing the ability to cultivate and sustain emotional states that don't depend on constant external stimuli. Solitude is no longer tolerated. It needs to be immediately filled with music, podcasts, videos, messages. Boredom has become an emergency that must be resolved in seconds. Silent contemplation, which for millennia was considered an essential human capacity, is now seen as a problem to be fixed. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this transformation is how it's altering our capacity to form deep emotional connections with other people. Love, friendship, compassion, all these complex emotions require time, sustained attention, and genuine presence to develop. They cannot be consumed quickly or experienced in doses of dopamine lasting a few seconds. When you're with someone you love, but part of your mind is anticipating the next notification from your phone, you're not really present to experience love completely. When you try to comfort a friend in difficulty, but feel impatient because the conversation is extending beyond what you consider normal, perhaps you're experiencing how your capacity to sustain complex emotions has been compromised. Deep human relationships are like symphonies. They unfold slowly with varied movements, meaningful silences, and crescendos that only make sense in the context of the complete work. But we're being trained to prefer electronic music with constant and predictable beats. The irony is that we live in the era with the greatest access to information about emotions and mental health in human history. We have meditation apps, online therapy, thousands of books on emotional intelligence, and yet rates of anxiety, depression, and feelings of existential emptiness continue to rise. This suggests that the problem isn't lack of knowledge about emotions, but something more fundamental is happening with our basic capacity to feel. It's as if we were trying to solve a malnutrition problem by reading about vitamins while continuing to eat only processed food. Knowledge about emotions cannot compensate for an emotional system that's being constantly overloaded and desensitized by an environment that wasn't designed for human well-being, but to capture and monetize our attention. When your capacity to feel is compromised, even the most sophisticated mental health tools can seem ineffective, not because they don't work, but because the problem is at a deeper level than these tools can reach. For almost all of human history, emotions were processed in community. Joys were celebrated collectively, Sorrows were shared, fears were faced together. There were community rituals to mark important emotional transitions. Births, deaths, marriages, harvests, all had ceremonies that helped people collectively process the complex emotions associated with these events. Now, each person is responsible for processing alone a volume of emotional stimuli that would be challenging even for an entire community. You receive news about global tragedies and are expected to process this information emotionally in an individual way. You see hundreds of edited and filtered versions of other people's lives on social networks and must find a personal way to deal with the comparisons and insecurities this generates. You face professional pressures in an increasingly competitive job market and must individually develop the emotional resilience necessary to thrive in this environment. And all this while maintaining the appearance that you're handling everything well, because admitting emotional difficulties is often seen as a sign of weakness or personal failure. I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, when was the last time you felt an emotion that persisted naturally in you for hours or days without you trying to modify it, distract from it, or medicate it? When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel complete sadness without immediately seeking something to cheer yourself up, or pure joy without worrying about capturing the moment or comparing it to other experiences? I know it may be difficult to even remember moments like this. Many of us have developed such a habituated relationship with constant regulation of our emotions through external stimuli that we've lost touch with what it's like to allow a feeling to simply exist and transform naturally. But your capacity to feel deeply is still there. It may be numbed, buried under layers of distraction and conditioning, but it hasn't disappeared. If this questioning resonates with you, share in the comments, I feel I've lost touch with my emotions, when your honesty can help other people who are living this same disconnection to realize they are not alone in this experience. Technology isn't inherently the problem. The problem is in how we've allowed it to completely restructure our emotional environment without considering the consequences. During the Industrial Revolution, it took decades to realize that factories were polluting the air and water. Now we know we need environmental regulations to protect our physical ecosystem. We're at a similar moment regarding our emotional ecosystem. Digital platforms are polluting our emotional environment, and we need to develop awareness and practices to protect our capacity to feel. This doesn't mean rejecting technology, but using it consciously and intentionally, the same way you would carefully choose what to eat if you discovered that your physical health was being compromised by your diet. You can begin to observe which digital content truly nourishes your emotional life and which only stimulates reward systems without adding real value. You can create spaces and moments free from digital stimuli where your emotions can arise and develop naturally. You can practice genuine presence in your interactions with other people, resisting the impulse to divide your attention between the person in front of you and your device. But individual effort, while important, isn't sufficient to reverse a transformation that's happening at a social and systemic level. Just as industrial pollution required regulatory changes and not just conscious individual choices, digital emotional pollution may also require broader changes in how we design and regulate our technologies. Imagine if digital platforms were designed to promote emotional well-being instead of maximizing screen time. Imagine if algorithms were programmed to recognize when you're emotionally overloaded and suggested a break instead of more stimulating content. Imagine if there were digital spaces designed specifically to help people process and integrate complex emotions instead of just consuming them quickly. These aren't utopian fantasies, but real possibilities that depend on consciously choosing what kind of emotional environment we want to create for ourselves and future generations. The question isn't whether technology will continue to influence our emotions, but whether we'll have any influence over how this happens. Recovering our capacity to feel deeply may be one of the most important challenges we face as a species. Our emotions aren't just personal experiences. They're the foundation of empathy, compassion, art, human connection, and the ability to make wise decisions about complex issues. A society of emotionally numbed people is a society incapable of responding adequately to crises that require not just rational analysis, but also emotional wisdom. The greatest issues we face as humanity, from climate change to social inequality, require not just technical solutions, but also the capacity to feel deeply the urgency and importance of these issues. If we continue losing our capacity to process complex and sustained emotions, we'll also lose our capacity to respond to challenges that threaten our collective future. Because in the end, it's our emotions that motivate us to act not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others and future generations. The good news is that the neuroplasticity of the human brain means that changes in our emotional capacity are reversible. Just as a musician who hasn't practiced for years can recover their skill with dedicated training, your capacity to feel deeply can be recovered through conscious practice. This may include regular periods of silence and contemplation, engagement with art and literature that require slow and complex emotional processing, cultivation of relationships that allow real vulnerability and intimacy, and creation of personal rituals that mark and honor important emotional transitions in your life. It may also include developing tolerance for uncomfortable emotions without the need to escape them immediately through distractions. Like an athlete who gradually trains their physical endurance, you can train your emotional endurance, your capacity to remain present with intense feelings until they transform naturally. And it may include intentionally seeking experiences that nourish your soul instead of just stimulating your reward systems, experiences that leave you feeling more connected to yourself, to others, and to something greater than yourself. Perhaps the deepest irony of our era is that in our quest to eliminate suffering through constant distractions and stimulations, we've also eliminated our capacity to experience deep and sustained joy. Because the capacity to feel cannot be selective, you cannot numb only the difficult emotions without also numbing your capacity to feel love, wonder, gratitude, and all the other emotions that make life worth living. When you recover your capacity to be present with sadness, you also recover your capacity to be present with joy. When you develop tolerance for anxiety, you also develop capacity for excitement and positive anticipation. When you stop fleeing from boredom, you discover that in the space of boredom exists potential for creativity, insight, and deep connection with yourself. The path back to an emotionally rich life isn't through more stimuli or more sophisticated distractions, but through a gradual return to simplicity, presence, and acceptance of the complete range of human experience. It's a return to recognizing that feeling deeply, even when it's uncomfortable, is what makes us human in the most fundamental way. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. The journey to recover our capacity to feel deeply is one of the most important issues of our time, and each person who commits to this recovery is contributing to a future where technology serves human flourishing instead of compromising it. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share this concern and the desire to cultivate a wiser and more conscious relationship with their own emotions and with the digital world we all inhabit. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we're witnessing. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this continuous journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more authenticity and emotional depth in a world that often encourages us to remain on the surface of our own experiences.
The experts in many institutions have heaped shame upon their own heads in recent years.
This is why we need two things. First of all, we need several institutions, not just one, so they keep each other in check. The basic assumption is humans are fallible. Institutions are composed of humans, so all institutions are fallible. They can make mistakes, they can be corrupted, and therefore you need several institutions. So if one institution is really corrupted, you can go to the courts, or you can expose it in newspapers or in other media or whatever. And secondly, every institution needs a self-correcting mechanism. This is the sign of a good institution, that it has mechanisms inside the institution to identify and correct its own mistakes. This is, again, a key difference between democracy and dictatorship. Dictatorship has no self-correcting institution. There is no mechanism in Russia that can expose and correct Putin's mistakes. But democracy is all about self-correction. The basic mechanism of elections is that every 4 years or so, you can say, oh, we made a mistake. Let's try something else. But of course, every mechanism like this is itself fallible. Elections can be rigged. Like we just had elections in Venezuela, and the Venezuelan people said, okay, we made a mistake with Chavez and Maduro. Let's try something else. But because Maduro is in power, he rigged the election. He said, no, I won. Since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, they had the hijab laws, which says that every woman, when she goes out, walking or even driving in her private car, she must wear the hijab. And until today, the regime had difficulty enforcing the hijab laws because they didn't have, millions of police officers that you can place on every street. A police officer, if a woman drives without a headscarf, immediately she's arrested and fined or whatever. In the last few years, they switched to relying on an AI system. Iran is now crisscrossed by surveillance cameras with facial recognition software, which recognizes automatically if in the car that just passed by the camera, the facial recognition software can identify that this is a woman, not a man, and she's not wearing the hijab, and identify her identity, find her phone number, and within half a second, they send her an SMS message saying you broke the hijab law, your car is impounded. And it's not like there is a report that goes to the court and some human judge goes over the data and decides what to do. The AI immediately decides, okay, the car is confiscated.
A lot of people, if they're watching this video, it was recommended to them by an algorithm.
Algorithms now are extremely powerful. They increasingly control us. I'm now publishing a book. I'm on a book tour. My number one client is not a human being, it's the algorithm. If I can get the algorithm to recommend my book, that's it. My job is done. The humans will follow the algorithm. We need these algorithms, otherwise we can't manage these huge information network without algorithmic help. They should be accountable. If a social media algorithm recommends to people a hate-filled conspiracy theory, this is the fault not of the person who produced the conspiracy theory. It's the fault of the people who designed and let loose the algorithm. There is this huge debate about freedom of speech. I think we should be extremely careful about censoring the free speech of human beings. But they should be held accountable for the decisions of their algorithms. And algorithms don't have freedom of speech. It's the first time in history that there is something which is not a human being that decides which stories to spread and that can create new stories.